Our offseason and free agency outlook for the Washington Commanders wide receiver room. We're going to rank the receivers we want re-signed, added via trade or free agency, and the ones that we simply don't want to come back or to Washington. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I am your host, David Harrison, here with you every Monday through Friday, but I'm also your friend covering the Washington Commanders on ground for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com, WUSA9.com, and I want to thank you for coming through today. In this episode, we are going to be talking about free agent and trade targets for the wide receiver room that we do and don't want parts of this offseason. We're also going to talk about players that we want or don't want the Washington Commanders to potentially consider re-signing from the receiver room, and that is all part of our Commanders receiver room offseason free agency preview for the 2025 NFL season. Of course, I want to thank you for coming through for today's episode. Every dayers, those of you who come through every day, even during the offseason, 5 days a week during the offseason, we are here, guys. I want to thank you for coming through. If you're not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's episode. If you're an everydayer and not subscribed, that is even more impressive. But make your life easier. Just click subscribe, man. If you're new to the show, I want to thank you for giving it a try. Locked On Commanders, like I said, daily podcast here with you 5 days a week, even during the offseason. So make sure you come back often. And if you want to be an everydayer, even better. Current 2025 wide receiver outlook for the Washington Commanders looks like this. Terry McLaurin, Luke McCaffrey. That is your active roster. Now, there are 3 other receivers on the 2025 roster right now. Lawrence Cager, Michael Strawn, and Chris Moore. Cager turns 28 in August, 6'5", 220 pounds, has been in the league since 2020, has played 21 career games in total for the Jets, Browns, and Giants combined, was a tight end for the Giants in 2023. His best season so far came in 2022 in 6 games for the Giants. He had 13 catches on 18 targets for 118 yards and a touchdown. Practice squad, bottom of the roster contender type of guy. Strawn comes in this season, turns 28 in August, 6'5", 225 pounds, was a 7th round pick in 2021 by the Indianapolis Colts, played in 23 games in his career so far between the Colts and the Panthers combined, was last active in 2023 with the Carolina Panthers. His best season came in 2022 with the Colts, where he had 3 catches on 9 targets for 59 yards. And then Moore is the more veteran of these 3, turns 32 in June, 6'1", 200 pounds, 4th round pick in 2016 by the Ravens, was last active in 2024 for 5 games with the Arizona Cardinals, 111 career games to his name, 18 starts. His best season came in 2022 with the Houston Texans when he had 48 catches for 548 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that is your current 2025 rosters. Those 3 gentlemen, Lawrence Cager, Michael Strawn, Chris Moore, and then, of course, Terry McLaurin, the star, the number 1 guy. Scary Terry, all that stuff. And then Luke McCaffrey, the second year or soon to be second year receiver once the new league year begins. Big slot guy, played a little bit of slot, played a little bit outside. I think Luke McCaffrey is a guy that a lot of people are hoping takes a big step in year 2. Certainly Adam Peters, but there are other players who could potentially be coming back. So the free agent list, the list of players from the Washington Commanders 2024 roster that are 2025 free agents, significantly bigger. KJ Osborne, Jamison Crowder, Olamide Zaccheaus, De'Ami Brown, and Noah Brown. So that's a handful of decisions that Adam Peters and Dan Quinn have to make together. Mainly Adam Peters has to make it, but Dan Quinn certainly, and the coaching staff will have their input. Those free agents, those 5 free agents combined in 2024 for 119 catches, 1,339 yards, and 7 touchdowns. If you go back through the season, we had a lot of conversations about this number 2 receiver by not by company. What is it? It is a group effort, right? Basically a group effort, number 2 receiver situation. I think Noah Brown essentially established himself as that true number 2 at some point before getting injured. But that is what these free agents account for. It's 33% of the team's receptions last year, 34% of the receiving yards, 24% of the scoring passes. Osborne, honestly, is the only one that I really can't make a case for re-signing. The team brought him in, never really used him. He was active for 1 game, got 19 offensive snaps. But Jamison Crowder, Olamide Zaccheaus, and both Noah and De'Ami Brown can be justified as re-signing options. So I'm going to give you this list of re-signing options in the order that I see them in. So for me, the number one re-sign candidate would be Noah Brown. That's who I would prioritize first. He was the third wide receiver in the season and on the team in receptions, 35 and 11 games, 453 yards and a touchdown, 12.9 yards per reception average, was second on the team behind Terry McLaurin. Now, again, injured his kidney. That cost him the season, but it might be a blessing in disguise because remember when he came in from the Houston Texans, when they released Noah Brown, they did so because they said, it's not that we don't like him, not that we don't think he's talented. We need guys that we believe can help us win now. And with Noah Brown, the injuries, the ailments that he was dealing with presently at the time, the Houston Texans just didn't feel like that was going to be a thing, so they let him walk. The Washington Commanders bring him in. Similarly to Marshawn Lattimore, not as long as Marshawn Lattimore, but similarly allow Noah Brown to kind of work his way through his injuries and then get him on the field. And now, because of the injured kidney, which is a fluke injury, not something that I've ever heard of happening twice, but, never say never, I suppose. It's the type of thing where he's actually going to have time now, or has had time, right, ever since that injury happened, to heal from his other injuries and heal from even some of the past injuries that might have been lingering. And now he's got all offseason to continue to do so, work on his body. So it could be a blessing in disguise for 2025 Noah Brown being able to come in a little bit healthier than maybe he would have before. De'Ami Brown would be the second re-signing candidate on my list. 30 catches in the regular season, but he really showed up in the postseason, seemed to really take a big step in his football IQ this year with his understanding of how his route combination works with other people, how he can best manipulate other defenders and do those things on the field, really find his way in zones, all that stuff. Had a lot of really good X's and O's conversations with De'Ami during the course of the season, dating all the way back through the preseason. And I can tell you, he clearly made me a smarter person as far as how receivers play the game, guys like him and Terry McLaurin as well. But, seeing De'Ami really take the steps, because if you're in every day or going back to preseason training camp, you'll remember I had De'Ami Brown on the bubble and I wasn't sure he was going to make this roster. Jahan Dotson getting traded, helped that out quite a bit. But, so I was really happy to see De'Ami take those steps forward this season. So he'd be my number 2 guy on the re-signing list. Then number 3 would be Jamison Crowder. Look, the clutch gene was evident in 2024, did spend a stretch on IR. But when he came back, remember, we talked about a lot. All he does is catch third downs and game-winning touchdowns. The clutch gene was big with Jamison Crowder last season. Also a punt returner, the only proven punt returner on the team. So unless they've got their eye on a draft candidate or somebody else in free agency that can return punts the way that he can, I think that he's certainly an option. And then finally, Olamide Zaccheaus. And look, I don't want Olamide Zaccheaus being last on this re-sign list, priority list, to be misconstrued as, David Harrison or Locked On Commanders doesn't like Olamide Zaccheaus. I'm a big fan of Olamide Zaccheaus. I had a lot of conversations with OZ as well during the season. But the thing about OZ is when I look at him on the field, everything that he does can be done by somebody else on this list or already on the active roster for 2025. Still, you got to look at, 45 receptions, the second most among wide receivers on the team, 506 yards, 3 touchdowns. Clearly a guy that should be considered for re-signing. But when you can't re-sign everybody, you got to prioritize what they bring to the field that other people don't bring to the field. Of course, it does take 2 to tango. And the one that I could see being the most willing to leave and go elsewhere, even if the Commanders want to bring him back, is Noah Brown. Because Noah Brown may not want to come in and compete with a sexy new free agent or trade acquisition for the number 2 snaps. He may want to go somewhere where he's kind of, I don't want to say guaranteed, but basically just more likely to have a bigger role for the team. So if Washington brings in Chris Godwin, T. Higgins, Devontae Adams, or somebody else like that, they could do it in the name of losing Noah Brown in the process. We'll go over the latest on those names and who we think should come in, who should not be considered to come in. That next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that today thanks to our friends over at FanDuel. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. And when the games tip off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my favorite team, the Denver Nuggets, or a late game rally, or I'm going to pick a player to hit a clutch 3 in the game. I never feel like I'm missing out on the action when I'm using FanDuel. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. FanDuel.com. Go to FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Continuing now, today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're talking about the wide receiver room. We just went over the current active roster, a whopping Terry McLaurin and Luke McCaffrey, 3 guys that are bottom of the roster, practice squad candidates, and then we went through the list of pending free agents, prioritized which ones we, and I say we, meaning I at Locked On Commanders, would prioritize, how I would prioritize trying to bring them back. Of course, there's also always the opportunity and potential that the Washington Commanders could bring in other talent from outside teams to help fill out this room. So the Commanders clearly need to do that with just Terry McLaurin, Luke McCaffrey. Even if you bring back, say, Noah Brown, you still have the need to go out there and add some more talent to the roster for 2025. So here's the latest on the big names out there. And we're going to do this in 2 categories. First category is going to be the big name receivers that I think will be available, and I'm on board with the team bringing in. The first one, Chris Godwin, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and James Yarko, Locked On Bucks, my good buddy, my co-host of Locked On Bucks for years before I landed here at Locked On Commanders, has been saying, and if you watch the NFL Squad episodes, first of all, you should be watching the NFL Squad episodes because they're a lot of fun. But if you watched the NFL Squad episode last week, saying there's no chance the Buccaneers are going to let Chris Godwin out the door. However, his theory, as much as I love it, was premised largely on the Buccaneers franchise tagging Chris Godwin and then working to get a deal done before the deadline to do so that, comes after he franchise tags somebody. Well, according to a recent column published by ESPN, Jenna Lane, ESPN's beat reporter that covers Tampa Bay Buccaneers, reported, quote, while sources told ESPN that the Bucs very much want receiver Chris Godwin back and will do what it takes to make this happen, it won't be by using the franchise tag. They used the tag as a placeholder the last time Godwin was a free agent in 2022, and they used it on him in 2021. So this would be his 3rd time being tagged. Therefore, it would have to be a 144% raise, and I'm told there is no chance, that's in quotes, of that happening. They'll do what it takes to re-sign him as a free agent, end quote. So Tampa Bay Buccaneers reportedly not willing to use a free agency tag. They said they'll do anything to bring him back, but they won't do that. A little bit of meatloaf there for you. They had to tag Chris Godwin in the past, honestly, because he's willing. He's shown that he's willing to take it to the open market. They tagged him in 2021, made him play on it. In that situation, there was no re-signing. They just made him play on the franchise tag. Then they tagged him again in 2022 because they couldn't work out a deal before the end of the season was coming. Eventually did give him an extension on top of that tag. That is the contract that expired at the end of the season, or that expires at the end of the season. If Tampa Bay does not re-sign him, Tampa will get $18.8 million in void year money coming up as dead cap for 2025. So regardless, Chris Godwin was going to cost the Buccaneers at least $18.8 million in 2025, whether he's on the roster or not. So the Buccaneers clearly have a lot of motivation to want to bring back Chris Godwin, including the fact that he's just a really good receiver. 6'1", 209 pounds. Godwin turns 29 on February 27th, so here pretty soon. So Commanders fans, if you want Chris Godwin to come to Washington, go show him some birthday love. Anyway, he was a 3rd-round pick by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2017, has played in 111 career games, 84 starts. He's got 579 career receptions, 7,266 yards, and 39 touchdowns in regular season play. He helped win Super Bowl 55 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2020, was a Pro Bowler in 2019, could be in line to be the comeback player of the year, coming off of a dislocated ankle suffered in Week 7 against the Baltimore Ravens. So why not do that in burgundy and gold? It's his 2nd major injury of his career. I know some Commanders fans out there are concerned about the injury history. He did tear his ACL in 2021, but remember, the Buccaneers subsequently franchise tagged him and extended him that very next offseason coming off the ACL. So they clearly weren't too worried about it. He's now 3 full seasons past the ACL. And the dislocated ankle is honestly a lot better than any type of torn ligament injury, soft tissue injury, all those things. So personally, injury history, I'm not concerned. Scheme-wise, he can play from the slot. In fact, the slot is where he's done some of his best work. Can play from the perimeter, plays a very strong brand of football. I've heard some people say he basically does what Terry McLaurin does. I'll tell you, Terry McLaurin, more of a finesse type of player not so much muscle, not so much physicality, right? I mean, I'm not telling you Terry has no physicality in him, but where Terry McLaurin's a little bit more smoother glide, kind of a finesse type player, Chris Godwin's a little bit more of a muscle you down the field type of player. So Chris Godwin, our number one receiver, who I expect to be available because, like I said, history tells me Chris Godwin very much interested in testing out the free agent waters. Now, doesn't mean he doesn't necessarily end up taking less money to come back to the Buccaneers, but it is what it is. Number two receiver that is going to be available that I would be on board with this team bringing in, Deebo Samuel, San Francisco 49ers wide receiver. John Lynch, the 49ers general manager, basically the team has made it known that they are going to be moving on from Deebo Samuel. However, John Lynch also said they're not just going to give him away, but actually might be in their best interest to actually give him away. Hat tip here to 49ers on SI reporter Grant Cohn, who has talked about the 49ers being on the hook for $15 million in dead cap if they trade Deebo Samuel or even release him prior to June 1st. They're only on the hook for $5 million in dead cap if they release him with a post-June 1st designation. And remember, you can't trade people. You can't trade players with a post-June 1st designation. You can only release with a post-June designation. Release them before June 1st. Put a post-June 1st designation on it. It moves dead cap money, all those things. So unless the 49ers, like if you're going to be willing to take on $15 million in dead cap space, it's got to be one heck of a trade. And I'm talking day one, day two, like high day two pick. If you're even getting a third round pick for Deebo Samuel, like is getting a third round pick really worth taking on $15 million of dead money? I don't know that it is. So it doesn't seem like it's worth trading Deebo, and every other NFL team knows that you're in this situation. So so unless somebody just really wants Deebo Samuel, I don't think you're going to get that trade offer. So if the Commanders want Deebo, basically all they got to do is be patient, wait for the 49ers to release him, then swoop in with the cap space that they have, lay down an incentive heavy deal, allure him in with Jaden Daniels and the familiarity of Adam Peters. As far as teammate concerns, I know some people are concerned about him as a teammate. Look, Deebo Samuel's not the first or last player who's wanted to choke out a kicker. Might be one of the few that's actually tried to do it. Beyond that, AP knows Deebo Samuel better than me, better than anybody else watching this, unless you're Adam Peters or Deebo Samuel himself. So if AP says it's okay to bring in Deebo Samuel, I'm not going to conflict with that until I have a reason to. Samuel is 6 foot tall, 215 pounds. 81 career games since being drafted in the second round of the 2019 NFL draft out of South Carolina. A lot of concerns over his injuries as well, but he has played 15 games in 3 of the past 4 years. Hasn't had a 1,000-yard receiving season since 2021. Hasn't had a 1,000-yard offensive season since 2023. Remember, he does run the ball a good amount as well. He has had a 1,000-yard offensive season twice, was a 2021 Pro Bowler, first team All-Pro, also in 2021. Scheme-wise, there's not really a lot that we saw from Kliff Kingsbury where I could tell you, boom, put Deebo Samuel in there and it's a perfect mix. But what it could do, adding Deebo Samuel, essentially will give Kliff Kingsbury the weapon needed to diversify his offense, evolve his offense a little bit, keep it from getting stale, and keep defense coordinators next year from being able to just purely look at this last year's tape and say, okay, we know exactly what Kliff Kingsbury is going to do. Spread the love a little bit on the run, save Brian Robinson a little bit, save Austin Eckler a little bit, basically use them as 3 running backs in that scenario with a receiver ability, obviously, in Deebo Samuel. And just the thought of this, Jaden Daniels, read option, you got Deebo going one way, you got Jaden optioning the other way. And, oh, by the way, you got Zach Ertz or Terry McLaurin or Chris Godwin or somebody coming across the formation, potentially coming open for a dump-off pass if you overcommit on the quarterback. I don't know how you defend that as a defense. So that's a lot of fun to think about. But those are the 2 guys that I think are going to be available, and I also am on board with this team bringing onto the roster. Now, there are some guys that I do think will be available or that I either do think will be available but don't necessarily want this team to take a chance on them, or I just don't think are going to be available. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're talking about the Washington Commanders wide receiver situation. We talked about the guys that are on the roster, not a lot, re-signing potential candidates and listing them in order. Talked about 2 guys that I think are going to be available. Deebo Samuel clearly is going to be available. Chris Godwin, If the Bucs ain't going to franchise tag him, I believe he will hit the open market. Of course, could be wrong there. We'll have to see how that whole thing unfolds. Now, here are a few guys, more than a few guys, I should say. Actually, here are 4 guys that I'm either not on board with or I don't think are going to be available. And we're going to order these in the most I'm not on board with. So number 1 guy that I'm not on board with is Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Christian Kirk is expected by some to be released by the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's 5'11", 200 pounds, had a solid 2021 season under head coach Kliff Kingsbury when they were both with the Arizona Cardinals. Kirk in that season had 77 catches, 982 yards, and 5 touchdowns. That's where this connection is really being made by a lot of people. Kirk then parlayed that into a massive payday with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Good for you, bro. Go get your bag. In 2022, turned in 84 catches, 1,108 yards, and 8 touchdowns, and was the poster boy for the media knows nothing because the Jacksonville Jaguars got ridiculed every direction. I'm included in that group for paying Christian Kirk what they paid him. And after the 2022 season, everybody was like, the Jacksonville Jaguars got the last laugh. Christian Kirk got the last laugh. And then in the past 2 seasons, Christian Kirk has not been able to has barely beaten those 2022 numbers combined in the last 2 years. So certainly not the same level of production. I get the connection here. And look, if Kliff wants him, then I'll tell you the same thing I say about Deebo. If Kliff wants him, he knows him better than anybody else sitting here. So if he wants him, go get him. But to me, honestly, guys, he seems like a slightly bigger Olamide Zaccheaus, and I'd rather just have OZ back. Also, if Luke McCaffrey is going to take a step forward, signing Christian Kirk, who is a slot guy, not really going to help Luke McCaffrey get his further burn and all those things. Number 2 receiver that I'm not on board with. This guy will be available because he is available. Rams wide receiver Cooper Kupp. 2 weeks have gone by since Kupp made it public knowledge that the Rams are trying to trade him, and we have heard nothing. Kupp is, look, he's just not as good as his name is anymore. Don't expect Washington being on that conversation. He'll likely get released. I don't think the Rams are going to find a trade partner. And if I'm Cooper Kupp and I get released, honestly, I'm going to tell anybody that comes up says, hey, look, I appreciate your interest. I'm interested, but let's talk after the draft. Because what I don't want to do if I'm Cooper Kupp is sign with the team on the cheap, because you're going to sign on the cheap, and then get rendered obsolete via the NFL draft. So Cooper Kupp, number 2 receiver that I would not want the Washington Commanders to get in on. Number 3 receiver who is available or will be available, New York Jets wide receiver Davante Adams. You want to talk about diva status? Davante Adams confirmed diva status. If you watch that receiver special on, I think it was Netflix, you can see that he is much more concerned with being the reason his team won than actually winning. It's interesting. But he could be had for a day 3 pick via trade right now. Will likely be released anyway. So again, just be patient and make the Jets release him. And who knows? After ring chasing with his buddies, right? He forced his way out of Green Bay to the Raiders, to Las Vegas, to the Raiders to play with Derek Carr. That didn't work. So he forced his way out of Vegas to the New York Jets to play with his buddy Aaron Rodgers. That didn't work. Maybe the 3rd time's the charm, and Davante realizes, hey, instead of playing with my friends, maybe I go make some new friends who are more talented, have a better system around them, and go win a ring. If he's learned his lesson, and if AP and Dan Quinn really believe he's learned his lesson, I mean, Davante Adams is still a very talented receiver. So that's why he's number 3, not completely high on the list. Number 4, so this is the guy that actually would most be on board with the Commanders going after, but I don't think he's going to be available. Wide receiver T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals. It's not that I don't like T. Higgins. It's that I think he's going to be way overpriced if he hits the open market. And reports are that the Bengals are going to franchise tag him anyway. It's going to be the non-exclusive franchise tag, which means the Commanders could negotiate with him, but they sign him. They're going to give up 2 first-round picks for him. He's just not worth 2 first-round picks. He's going to be looking to be the top dog somewhere, I'm pretty sure. I don't think he wants to be the number 2. I'm not sure he even wants to be the co-number 1. So if that's the case, then T. Higgins won't be a fit for the Washington Commanders anyway. So T. Higgins, very talented guy, but I just think it's going to cost way too much, whether it be giving up draft picks to negotiate with them via the non-exclusive franchise tag, or even if he hits free agency free and clear, the bidding war on him, I think, is just going to be too much. So that's how I see this wide receiver room for the Washington Commanders currently in 2025, who they might re-sign, and the offseason free agency / trade picture this year. We will do this the rest of the week. We got mailbag actually coming up on Wednesday, so come back for that. But then we will continue with our next 2 position groups, probably looking at defensive end and offensive tackle coming up next to round out the week. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me directly. And to do that, go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become an insider today. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler Rowland kicks you off in the morning with some NFL espresso. Tony Wiggins brings you back in for some real NFL talk in the afternoon. It's the all new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. As always, I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, everydayers. Thank you for coming through on a regular basis like you do. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.